Thank you all for being here and coming to listen to our event around sustainability. First of all, I also want to do a land acknowledgement, and I wanted to say just a little bit more and maybe give it a little bit more emphasis than maybe is sometimes given, because I think one of the things that we have heard is, and of course it's important to acknowledge the land that you're on. And I was born on the lands of in the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam and the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish nations, Coast Salish nations. But what I wanted to talk about, and I know some people do land acknowledgements, some people haven't done that yet, and they're not really, maybe comfortable in it yet. And I think part of that that awkwardness, I just want to address that. I think it's an important part of feeling into what settler cultures did and the acts that happened and what happened to language. And so I just want to give it a little bit of a deepening to the things that we're trying to do in terms of reconciliation. If we want it to be sincere, if we want it to be just, if we want it to be something that's meaningful, I'm just sort of in my own way trying to take it to a little bit different level and really ask what does reconciliation mean and what can I do. And we went to a DPAC summit, and there was a speaker. Her name was Jo Corona, and she's First Nations, and she talked a little bit about some of the things. And so one of the things you'll see that coming up at the top there is one of the links, and that is a free course that UBC offers. So if you want to find out more about reconciliation, that's a place that you can find out. And so in terms of resiliency and sustainability, that is a culture. The cultures have managed to withstand a lot of things. So just in terms of connecting that to sustainability. So that's one of the things that you could consider. Other things, of course, are reading. And this is a local writer, Chelsea Val. And so in terms of one of the 7 things that this writer this person who basically read her book was talking about was around how many communities, Indigenous communities, are under advisories, water advisories, because of contaminants in their water and their groundwater from mining or whatever it happens to be. So just in terms of thinking about the types of things that are sustainable and actions that people can take in terms of not only talking about reconciliation, but also about sustainability and getting more understanding of what's happening to Indigenous communities. And so the person who, so Jo Corona, who spoke at that session, she gave us lots of different links. So if that's something you're interested, you like doing some reading, there's a lot of great resources there that you could also look at. So again, thank you for listening to that. And I have lots of personal stories, and one thing I just want to say in terms of transitioning, and part of our things is about economies, and there's different types of economy, and we're really talking about thinking about how do we shift our economy. And so one of the things, and I just want to tell you a little story about walking, and so living here I was born in Vancouver, lived in Kitsilano, spent a lot of times, and I mean, these are the names that were settler names, there's Jericho and Spanish Banks and all of those things, and the UBC endowment lands. One day I was walking through in the endowment lands, going up behind the Museum of Anthropology, and behind that, I don't know if you're familiar with that, there's a longhouse behind there. And I was about 12 years old, and I was walking behind there, and it was dusk, and I was on my own, and I kind of spending my time by myself and feeling a little bit isolated. And it was one of the most just impacting moments of my life when I came, and I could hear drumming and I could hear singing, and I saw this glow of this beautiful warm light coming out of that longhouse. And I stood several paces back and just sort of watched and listened, and someone gestured for me to come in, and I went into that longhouse. And the very first thing that happened is someone gifted me with something. And I spent my whole evening, and I can't even remember how I got home or what happened after that, but it was like entering such a different world. And what I want to say about that is that, you know, true wealth is not about how much you own or possess or hoard or keep. It's about how much you can give. And that was one of the really deep lessons I learned um, in that. So thank you again for listening. So in this presentation, so I just recapping a little bit of what last year was about. So we started off and we, sustainability, what is that word? And so we talked and I asked people, well, can you tell me what's your top 3 words? And so people, and so the larger the writing, the more people emphasized those words. And so this is just sort of a little snapshot of what people from last meeting were thinking about when they were thinking sustainability. And, of course, sustainability is lots of things, but certainly it is our environment and the richness and the beauty and the diversity. And so preserving that in whatever way we can, is a big part of making things that are sustainable and doing things and practices and lifestyles that are sustainable, that are not impacting the environment in a negative way, because we want to keep this beautiful planet. And so what we're doing tonight is we have a whole raft of incredible people who are here tonight that have put a lot of effort and a lot of their time and a lot of their passion into what is sustainability, what types of practices, what types of actions people can do. And so it's really up to us right now. The future is up to us, and what we do from this moment forward really does matter. And so as you listen to tonight's presentation and presenters, I just want you to think about, what are the types of things that you might be able to do? What are the things that you can maybe incorporate into your life? And what is it going to mean? What types of changes? And of course, changes always take can be a little bit challenging at times. And we've all had to deal with an awful lot of change lately. So no one's really saying, hey, I want to have more change. But really, we're at a very, very important part in time in the history of this planet. And what we do right now as the people who are living on this planet does mean a lot. And so you might remember last year, there were lots of actions about the climate, some wonderful youth-led sustainability actions, and other youth gathering together from other organizations, and even Greta came here. So there was a lot of energy around it, and of course, that was in a different time where everyone could gather together. But talking about climate justice now, climate justice affects so many things. So we're gonna what we're doing here in the city, in our schools, and all those types of things really is about, how do we make it equitable situation? How do we create a planet that's livable and sustainable, and have the right types of actions on it? So you will probably remember also Fridays for Future, and so that was a big weekly event that happened, just to sort of really put pause to why this is such an important issue. And so last year we had several sustainability teams come with us, and you can see there's a couple that are in that picture on the right there, that are here tonight, that are going to be talking a little bit about what they're doing and how they've transitioned, because they were both in grade 12 last year. So there's Annabella and Samantha. They're both going to talk to us about what they're doing and how they're approaching their year after sustainability and high school, and what they're doing. And so we are going to start off with Annabella, and I'm just going to let Annabella now talk about what is happening in her life. Are you ready to go, Annabella?
Yeah, okay. So hi everyone, I'm Annabella, and I spoke here last year along with two of my my other friends from Sustainability Teens, so it's good to be back. Yeah, so last year I was in 12th grade and I was working really closely with a bunch of other youth within Sustainability Teens, organizing, protesting, coordinating, and learning. And Sam, who's also here today, I'm sure will tell you a lot about that because she was definitely one of the central coordinators within all of the organization of events and has been there since the beginning. But yeah, throughout my experience with Sustainability Teens, I had so many opportunities to learn and to speak my voice at multiple events, such as this event. And yeah, so when I graduated from high school, I also sadly graduated from Sustainability Teens, but I also kept kind of like a small mentor role, still keeping in touch with the social media team and kind of guiding them on that. And we did a few campaigns, which were very successful. And I still continue to speak at smaller events. And now I'm a full-time student at UBC and I'm studying geography, environment, and sustainability. And it's interesting for me to speak here today because it gave me a reason to sort of reflect on what's happened. A year ago today, I remember I was just deciding on what to apply for and, in university, and I was really heavily um, in sustainability teens, and the aspects of climate change and my future really were becoming really important to me, and I knew that I had to pursue this passion. And I also figured that it's a really good time to be studying politics and sustainability and environment, and our changing ecosystems in our times today. So yeah, so despite learning online, it's been very interesting, and I've really enjoyed all my classes so far. But the one thing I really wanted to bring into conversation here today with you all was how do we continue to talk about climate change in today's lenses? So the all-encompassing nature of COVID-19 has made it almost impossible to talk about anything else, but it's clear that the imperatives of climate change have not gone away. And so how do we restart the conversation on climate? And so it's clear that most people do agree on climate change, and it's a genuine threat. But what I find is lacking is a real sense that the climate crisis connects with our lives and the things that matter to us now. So connection is actually very, very critical. And climate change at times, it can be very confronting, very overwhelming. We hear a lot about climate degradation, and it's difficult for people to feel inspired when we're constantly being bombarded by, these stories and headlines and news. So it's important to also focus on the solutions and focus on the positives and engaging with emotions. And this is actually hugely what I experienced and continue to experience in my life and with sustainability teens, was the use and connection with emotions and use of artwork, murals, signs, documentaries, working with filmmakers, and creating overall events that interconnect people with nature. And that's how we raise awareness and getting people to feel something. So, we don't really need more science, the solutions are there, but we need more people. The science in itself only gets us part of the way, and the larger question is everyone in every profession has to stand up and has to step up and tell stories and make connections, because we need multiple voices, and so many voices, so that the politicians who are getting in the way of our progress can no longer ignore these voices. So yeah, it's not about getting rid of science completely, but it's about we need an army of communicators. So that's why I'm so excited to be here today, to listen to all of you and hear your stories and your journey. And yeah, thank you. I think we have more sustainability teens today that are going to be talking, so I'm excited to hear them as well.
Thank you so much, Annabella. That was really a wonderful recap of what's gone on, and reflection of this last bit, and also just the real important issues that we have to think about. So Samantha, are you ready to talk about Samantha is just one second, I'm going to switch to the next. So Samantha she also graduated last year. And so she was going to come to our event last year. Some other things happened, and so she wasn't able to make it. But she's been very involved in climate justice for a long time. Sorry, and let me not zip through all of those things. But one of the things that she noticed, social issues and social injustices and the tie-in between that and the environment. And so her work with the sustainability teams is great, and she's working with a couple of different organizations doing some mentoring, which is terrific. And it's wonderful that she's she decided instead to take a gap year. So she is going to be going back to school, but she took a year off and decided that she'd put a year towards really being a mentor, and which is a great thing. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more. What I did also find out is that she is also connected a little bit to the VSB SC. I think she was chair last year or maybe the year before. So anyhow, I'd like to welcome her and turn it over to her in telling us about what she's doing. And I'm just going to stop sharing so you can go ahead and you can share your screen if you want.
Awesome, thank you so much. Hold on, give me 1 second. Okay, thanks so much for introducing me, Sky. It's really good to be here. It's nice to be able to speak with all of you. But Sky gave a bit of an introduction, but I'll just introduce myself a bit again. But my name is Sam. I use she, her pronouns, and I am an 18-year-old person, and I was born and raised on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. I'm just going to send a link. I can't find the chat. Maybe I'll do it later. To native-land.ca. I really recommend to anyone who hasn't yet looked at that link to check that out, because then you'll be able to find the names of the peoples whose territory you're on. And the reason I want to give a little bit more emphasis to the land acknowledgement is just that there's so much importance. As a young climate activist like myself, it's really important that being on these lands that were stolen and unceded, there have been Indigenous peoples fighting and defending this land for generations before us, and it's really imperative that we follow their leadership and we really take the teachings that they have gained and developed over generations and really just incorporate that into our work. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but it's currently Landback Indigenous Solidarity Week of Action. So that's in particular why it's so important that this is brought up. So yes, a little bit about me. I graduated from Prince of Wales last spring, so I'm currently on a gap year, like Sky was saying, and I really wanted to do that because I realized in the later half of high school just how much of a priority climate action was to me, and I really invested a lot of time and energy in that, and especially in grade 11 and 12 when sustainability was just starting, and it became a huge part of my life. So I'm currently doing that. Oh, can you not see my screen? Oh, it's okay. I can try again. It's not super important though. Can you see it?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, lovely. Yeah, and I'm on a gap year right now, and I'm going to be going to Queen's University next fall. So I really discovered my interest and passion for sustainability in my early teens and early high school, and I slowly got more involved, like actually organizing and doing things. Once I took those first steps, like you were saying, I was involved with the Vancouver School Board Sustainability Conference for 3 years from grade 10 to 12. So it was a really big part of my life as well. I'm really excited to hear from Myra and the VSBSC team of this year. And I think, yeah, it's going to be such a treat to hear from them and for all of us to hear from them. And just a little bit about why I do what I do. This is just a photo of me and my really good friend who's also on a gap year, and just some photos from climate strikes, of course. Yeah, just a little bit about what it's like to be a teenager growing up in the midst of a climate crisis that we know is happening and that science is telling us is extremely urgent. It's for me and a lot of other youth, it's absolutely terrifying because lives are already being disrupted all over the world, more so than we even feel here in Vancouver, in Canada. And the more that we grow up, we realize that there's such a dissonance between the action that's happening and the lack of action that's happening, I should say, and the action that we know is necessary to mitigate a crisis like this. But what we do, what we've done, thankfully, is we've come together. So there are several people in Sustainability, like Annabella. We know each other through Sustainability, and now we have dozens and dozens of youth from across Metro Vancouver who really come together because we share a sense of urgency about the climate crisis, but we also share hope that it can get better and that it will get better, and that the actions we take today can create that better future where everyone can thrive. So although a lot of youth organizers enter spaces like this with, fear and anger and a sense of hopelessness when it comes to the climate crisis, I feel like for me personally, and I know a lot of other sustainability teams as well, we together, through doing things like this, we've managed to really come together and create a community of hope and togetherness and really collective action. And we're really all just striving for that hope of a better future that we believe is possible. If we didn't believe it was possible, then we wouldn't be trying at all. We would just give up. But that's sort of the power of youth and why it's been such a pleasure to work with other youth who also feel the same way. So I'll talk a little bit more about sustainability now, since this was a very big part of my life, and it is obviously, I'm sure you've all heard about the climate strikes that happened last year, and we were the organizers for that. So I was a central organizer in the past few years, but now, since I graduated, I'm playing more of a mentorship role now. And just a little bit about us. We are a movement of young people in Metro Vancouver who take action on climate issues in our area, and we're brought together by a shared sense of purpose. So really a vision of hope and equity that really drives what we do. We know that we're in the midst of a climate crisis and that action is needed now, and because we're youth, we have sort of a unique ability to be open-minded and receptive to wide-scale, necessary, dramatic climate solutions. And we're bringing together our communities now to rally behind this. So a little bit of background about what we've done. Last September was a very big climate strike that happened. Funny story here is that we were maybe expecting like 10,000 people. That was our goal. And it really blew our expectations away. And although we didn't have any concrete, like, ooh, this is what we want, like, this is exactly what we're asking for, it was the general message of, like, we need climate action now that really has helped shift narratives and shift people's perspectives on just how urgent the climate crisis is. And really, that kind of set the stage for what's happening now, which is, like, we're in the midst of a pandemic. There are lots of dramatic changes happening. I'll just jump forward a bit. So in September 2020, we did a campaign called the Not Going Back campaign, and that was really about demonstrating that we are not going to go back to old systems of like corruption and greed and overconsumption and systems that enable racism and leave people marginalized and leave people behind. And in November 2020, this sort of leads to something concrete that happened recently. I won't talk too much about this because I know Matt is here and he'll be able to talk much more about this, but Vancouver passed an extremely bold and necessary climate emergency action plan that really highlights equity, and it's a good example of the kind of change and action that we need. So that was a huge win for us and for the climate movement and for the people of Vancouver. So big appreciations there. And just, talking about this now, I've seen so many adults, okay, so I've been working with a lot of youth for a long time, and there's so much hope and there's so much life. And the reality is that, yes, youth are the future, but that doesn't mean that we don't need everybody, and everybody has a role to play. I believe that every one of you can make a significant difference. Like, every one of you can make an impact on the people in your life. You can be the one that inspires them to join a group or sign a petition or take action. And it is so necessary to have everybody involved. And there's just so much change. Like, our entire world is going to have to change if we are going to mitigate this crisis. And that really begins and continues with the people in this room and just the people in our lives and how we bring people together and how we really collaborate. So these are a list of things that you can do. I'm also going to send some links to the chat, a lot of links, because there are lots of things that you can do. So it ranges from, joining a group called For Our Kids, which is really, really awesome. And there are several links to donation pages for Indigenous land defenders, because, like I said, Indigenous people are crucial to, if you care about climate change, like, Indigenous people are crucial to the protection of our natural spaces. And there's a stat, like 80%, so Indigenous people make up 5% of the population, but protect 80% of the world's biodiversity. So that's just kind of a thing to really hammer home just how important Indigenous sovereignty is and how important it is that we stand in solidarity with them. And yeah, I think I will end there. Thank you so much.
Thank you too, Samantha. And so yeah, there's lots of events going on. Sustainability are doing things all the time. And there was the night that was the last night that it was getting voted on. I think that Matt's going to talk about, Matt Horn from the city of Vancouver. They had a watch party. I'd never gone to a watch party before, but it was a lot of fun and a great way to participate and still have some sort of social connection. So, look at all the different things that you can get involved in. So so next we are going to we're going to go to this is a VSB program. So it's VSBSC, which stands for the Vancouver School Board Sustainability Conference. And so it is student-led and student-organized, and they do a terrific job. And so we have the great fortune of having Myra Way here today, who is she's the chair this year. So she's going to talk a little bit about what they're organizing, and with her she's brought a couple of other people. So this is their 9th annual conference on sustainability, and so they had an event even this week as well, where they had 2 evenings where you could come and listen to it was Oceanwise, I think, in BCC. So I'm sure Myra will talk a little bit about that, and that was terrific. I really enjoyed that. And so along with her is Rachel Dong and Leona Lam. And so I'm sure they're going to tell you lots about themselves. But so Myra's in grade 12, so this is going to be, sort of her, she's leaving the VSB, but we see there's Rachel Dong is in grade 11 at Eric Hamber, and she's their logistics coordinator. And also Leona Lam is the public outreach coordinator, and she's in grade 10. And so they're all representing different schools. So there's Prince of Wales, Eric Hamber, and Sir Winston Churchill. So we've got three schools represented here. So it's great to have them here. And they're going to talk a little bit about their Restart program. And of course, with COVID and everything that's going on, that's, it's been a big impact in terms of planning and all the other stuff that affects that. And so I think I'll do less talking and I'll let them do more talking about themselves because it's much more interesting that way. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you, Myra.
All right. Thank you for introducing us. I'm just going to share my screen and pull up our slides. Sorry, 1 second.
We can see them.
Okay, there we go. Yes. So yeah, we're here to talk about the annual VSB Sustainability Conference and what we do as organizers. So first, we have a little bit about us. Like Sky said, my name is Myra and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a grade 12 student at Prince of Wales Mini and my role is the chair of VSBSC this year. So I've been involved with the organization since the start of high school, and I found it to be a great opportunity to learn about sustainability and connect with youth in Vancouver who share similar passions as I do. This year, I'm responsible for overseeing the vision of our events and for coordinating team meetings.
Hi, my name is Rachel and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a grade 11 student in the Challenge program at Eric Camber this year. Last year, I was a youth head delegate for the conference, which has inspired me to become further involved as an executive member. Through the VSBSC, I've had the opportunity to learn from and connect with passionate students and workshop facilitators across the district. Now, as one of the logistic coordinators, I'm mainly responsible for applying for grants, establishing sponsorships with appropriate organizations, and organizing registration through Eventbrite.
Hi everyone, my name is Leona Lam and my pronouns are she and her. I'm a grade 10 Prelude student at Sir Winston Churchill. I applied for the VSBSC Outreach Executive role after an enlightening experience as a youth head delegate at the 2020 February conference. A youth head delegate is a passionate high school student who wants to get more involved in terms of creating a sustainable environment. Youth head delegates help us promote our events in their schools and within their social circles. They are a great addition to the VSBSC team. Last year, attending a conference with like-minded individuals who all had a passion for sustainability was empowering. It was uplifting and reassuring knowing that people cared about this environment as much as I do. This year, alongside my partner, Grace, we work and have hired 27 youth head delegates. We plan YHD meetings and work on promotion to expand our audience reach.
So the VSB Sustainability Conference is an annual youth-led environmental conference, and it typically features interactive workshops, panel speakers, and an NGO fair. As a unique opportunity for students to network across the district, VSBSC aims to facilitate meaningful dialogue around sustainability and empower youth with skills that they need to take meaningful action. Teachers, staff, and other community members are also invited to attend and participate in the discussion. Regardless of their previous involvement, all attendees are welcome and will hopefully take away something tangible. So whether that is a newfound interest, volunteer opportunity, or even just meeting a new friend. We are supported by the district, mainly from Ashley and Ron, who's here today from the Sustainability Department. And we're very grateful for them for all their help and guidance. And they've been a part of this project for many years and continue to support and promote all of our endeavors.
This year, as we could not host an in-person event due to COVID, we have had to readjust our plans. Instead of the one-day-long event, we are doing 3 shorter online conferences instead. The goals of this year's conferences is to introduce students to various pathways and careers in sustainability, as well as facilitating plans of action. We have a dedicated group of 27 youth head delegates who act as ambassadors of the organization and promote our events, among other tasks. This year, we wanted to place emphasis on cohort and community bonding, especially as COVID has created a barrier for these connections. I am involved in managing these students, and we provide them opportunities to network with each other, discuss sustainability projects they're involved with, and to talk about issues that matter to them. By way of these meaningful conversations, we are able to encourage students to take action in their communities.
The overarching goal of our events is to continue promoting youth leadership, community engagement, and learning about the many facets of climate justice. We hope to facilitate meaningful discussions around sustainability, empowering youth with the skills and network that they need to enact positive change. We aim to foster an engaging learning environment that enables youth to connect with like-minded individuals for a day of education, growth, and inspiration. Unfortunately, the BC curriculum places little emphasis on studying climate change, and it is through events like the VSBSC where we can inspire one another to learn more about sustainability and take actions into our own hands.
With that being said, our first event restart was held this week. We had around 150 attendees across both sessions, and we brought in guests from Oceanwise and BC Sustainable Energy Association. In breakout rooms, students and adult attendees were invited to participate in dialogue around careers and action in sustainability. Our priority was creating spaces for high engagement, interaction, and participation. And to keep the momentum that we build from these sessions, we send everyone follow-up volunteer opportunities from NGOs that we reach out to so they can connect and get involved beyond just the conference. There were a lot of amazing discussions from these sessions, and I'm just going to share a few key takeaways. So first thing that we learned was that small actions can have a large impact. It's all about the long-term change that you may or may not be able to see right away. So just turning off the tap when you're not using it, choosing to bike instead of drive, or eating a few plant-based meals a week, all of these personal actions that we take to be more sustainable in our everyday lives will have a positive effect in the long run. Another takeaway was from BCC. The greenest form of energy is the energy you don't use. So we can talk about renewable energy sources like solar energy, wind energy, or hydro, but at the end of the day, reducing your energy usage is ultimately the most sustainable. And so this means unplugging electronics when you're not using them, or taking shorter showers, and use natural light as much as possible. So finally, the biggest takeaway is the importance of community. Gathering with groups of people who care about the same issues as you do is incredibly empowering and uplifting. Learning, sharing, and connecting with others is so important so that we can get together and make impact on the environment on a much larger scale.
Our conference amplifies the concerned voices of youth ready to fight for climate justice. Environmental sustainability isn't generally included in the BC curriculum, so our conference works towards breaking that education barrier. This is the generation that will create change, and the VSB Sustainability Conference has enlightened many, expanded perspectives, and has created an inspiring movement to take action. So, why is sustainability important? Climate change has created a lot of issues in terms of habitat destruction, climate refugees, and the overall pollution of our planet. With the exponentially growing population and limited natural resources, we must take immediate action to sustain our planet for the future. We see the word sustainability a lot in newspaper articles, and we hear it in speeches, but why is it a topic that should be brought up in our daily conversations? Keeping conversations going helps to build and maintain momentum. The more people that get involved and are engaged, the more action we will be able to take. Scientists estimate that the planet has 12 years left before the detrimental effects of climate change become irreversible. We encourage you to take initiative and follow along in support behind environmental activists and implement sustainable changes in your lifestyle.
There are many ways where adults can help promote student involvement in climate action. The first is through hosting events like the VSBSC, which helps to raise awareness and inspire people to take action. Second, be an ongoing advocate. This can be through encouraging sustainability within the school curriculum or simply giving students the same level of ability to attend protests as they would when participating in extracurricular activities such as school sports. Further, adults have an integral role in helping change rules and regulations in society. Use your voice to vote for leaders who will be accountable and take climate action. You can also work towards making waste socially unacceptable, for example, putting an end to single-use saran wrap and styrofoam use so often in grocery stores, and supporting eco-friendly alternatives instead. Though the possibilities are endless, it all comes down to disconnection, building sympathy, empathy, and hope.
Yeah, so this concludes our presentation today. If you want to get in touch after this event, feel free to save this slide right here. We have our website and Instagram where we post fairly regularly. Thank you guys for listening. Are there any questions?
Maybe we can take a few minutes, like if there's a few questions, maybe people want to, but I do want us to have a panel discussion. And so if you have your questions, you can certainly put it into chat, or if you want to have, if there's something specific that you're burning to talk about right now. But I just want to make sure that we go through and talk to all the presenters. And I really think that it's very, very valuable. Last year, I remember we did a panel discussion, and it was really great because you can hear all the different voices for all the different questions, and it's really wonderful.
Did you want me, there are just a couple of questions in chat, quite a few comments. I encourage people to read them. Did you want me to read those out to you now? I know it's difficult to follow while we're going on, or should we just throw them out a little bit later?
Can we maybe save those questions and address it when we start the panel? Is that okay with you, Myra? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much again, and great events. So
Scott, yeah, it's just I'm keeping a list too. So so when we get to the point where you want to turn back to questions, I've got a bunch here.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so we are now going to carry on with the next presenter. And so tied into this, and I think Myra already mentioned, and I think maybe some of the other people from Restart also talked about Ron McDonald. So he is the manager, or he was, should I say, the manager of energy and sustainability at the Vancouver School District. So he's a staff and he's got a lot of experience in industry as well as regional government and in sustainability and climate work. So he's been in involved with things to do with climate change for over 18 years, and I think with the Vancouver School Board for 7 years or so. So he's got some great training and stuff that helps him understand some of the ways in terms of that will connect with how you can maybe, for instance, look at resource conservation or transportation and those types of things. So two of the things that so besides the fact that he's been great in connecting me with these wonderful students, and I'm sure everyone agrees, some great insights and energy and lots of hard work that's gone into this. But so it's great to have those students' voices, and I know that he's very happy having heard their voices. And so I just want to point out the two things that I think are kind of the themes that, so the Vancouver School Board has 5 themes in terms of around sustainability, which I'm sure Ron will talk a little bit about. But 2 of the ones that we can see definitely, and the main one that we can see here is about leadership and sustainability. And so we saw that last year, and we're seeing it again this year, the incredible learning that goes on, and the student-driven, student-led initiatives with, of course, some of the facilitating that happens. And it's really great to have a sustainability part for the VSB, and having that have a real important and key, emphasis in terms of some of the focuses that the VSB is working on. So also sustainable transportation. So I know lots of parents are interested in that. So hopefully we'll hear a little bit about those 2 things. And this is just a little thing about, there was a sustainability audit a few years ago. I guess now in 7 years, I don't know how much that has changed since then. So maybe Ron will have a little bit of words about that. But again, it's about the VSB addressing that all those activities that are directly and indirectly impacting the environment. Most significant opportunity is developing conscientious citizens. And I think, like I said, you can agree with the fact that this program, the VSB SC, has been a wonderful addition, and also giving youth that space in school to bring youth together and to learn and to grow and to teach. So I'll give it over to you now, Ron.
All right. Can you hear me? Somebody give me a thumbs up, Sky. Okay, I'm going to try sharing my screen, and of course, let's just see what's. Do you see a slide? A lot of blue on it?
Not yet.
Okay, hold on.
I think it's coming now. Yep.
Yeah. Perfect, it's just, we work on 5 different platforms, and PowerPoint is the weakest link to work with on multiple platforms. So do you see a title page slide there? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. I've lost the view of all the people on the screen, but so my name is Ron McDonald. I'm the manager of energy and sustainability at the Vancouver School District. I've been in this role since about 2013. And one of the first things I was tasked with was creating an environmental sustainability plan as directed by the board. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that plan is all about, and give you some ideas of the things we're doing. And as well, I'm going to talk about how we're trying to adapt that to a post-COVID world. So I just want to confirm, Sky, do you see the second slide?
Yep.
You nod your head? Okay. So let's talk about the sustainability plan. Its origins go back to the 2000s when City of Vancouver was creating its greenest city, and there was a few mandates there for the school district to do some work. Over several years and with many interruptions, we created the plan. There was a teacher strike in there. There was disruptions in public consultation with the district, and the board was fired by the minister, and a very difficult time to do consultation. But the actual pace of that allowed us to really wrap our heads around what we were really talking about instead of doing it in a rushed issue. And in the spring of 2018, the board approved the plan. And if you go to www.vsb.ca, there's a drop-down box for sustainability. On the right-hand side, there's a poster of our sustainability plan. And we've structured it loosely around the 5 petals of a dogwood flower. So the mandate from the board was for the VSB to be the most sustainable school district in North America. Now, there isn't any defined or agreed upon definition of that. I mean, there are hardware definitions of sustainable schools, measuring, energy use, waste generation, and things like that. But the mandate to be a sustainable school district allowed us to think bigger than just what our facilities do. And what came out through a lot of the consultation was that the sustainable school district has to provide a positive connection to the natural world. And that natural world connection is a seed from which empathy and deeper things grow. And of course, the comment, our most significant opportunity as an educational institution is to develop conscientious citizens. And that came through in a lot of the ways when we were talking to people. I want to throw out a concept here, and this relates less at the high school or secondary level, but at the early grade level. There's a great quote from an educator, David Sobel. And if you Google David Sobel and Beyond Ecophobia, it'll change your life. He just basically said, we are not always motivating people by the crises. And if you talk to any of the famous environmentalists, most of them were motivated to their environmental activities through some form of a connection to nature. And so there's this great quote, if we want children to flourish, we need to give them time to connect with nature and love the earth before we demand that they go and save it for us. And there's a particular kind of narrative out there that old folks like myself and the people older than me are going to walk away and leave a mess, and the kids got to clean it up. But That may or may not be true, but we can't just put that burden on young children. So this theme is captured in BCTF and other educational materials, and it's a very useful tool to start with. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I use Venn diagrams since we're an educational institution. If we're trying to create a sustainable society, you know, we have, here's the VSB somewhere situated. Do you guys see the Venn diagram showing up? It's a bit of an animation, so sometimes it doesn't work. But somewhere in here, we do an activity. And of course, as we all know from middle school, each of those activities is a dot, and there's an infinite number of things you can do inside each of these Venn circles. So educational organization does a bunch of stuff, but then along comes some item that's outside of really our mandate. And we say, well, how is society going to treat that? Well, then we discover that the city's involved, and the city can work on those kind of issues, but they can also overlap and help us and collaborate with us on stuff that's within our mandate. And then there's more and more activities you can do. Suddenly you realize the province has a role to play. You keep going. There's the nonprofit sector we can work with. The federal government has to be involved. There's the industry and suppliers, utilities. International agreements have to be respected. Post-secondary institutions are involved. Lots and lots of individuals. Most of the action on climate change will happen at the very individual level. And then basically it looks like a big mess, but it's going to be complicated, but that's just how it is. If we're going to move society towards a sustainable future, it's going to be complicated. But I take back, I can't do a slide back, but the key feature I want to highlight is that VSB, as the educational K-12 organization in the city, has a role where it's unique as an educator, but also has a role where it overlaps with so many other players. And that's kind of what the sustainability plan landed on, was saying we can't solve all the problems, but our greatest gift to society is K-12 education. So we can offer that up as well. And that's where you get the kind of things we're seeing today with the sustainability teams and the sustainability conference. So again, I'm going to briefly show some slides about the types of activities we do, but I think there's a bit of text. I'm not going to talk about them all, but if somebody wants to screenshot these or read these in the plan. But so the actual, I know, Sky, you mentioned leadership in active transportation, but time and again, the educational mandate comes back as one of our biggest gifts we can offer. And so many of the things we do, this is the top pictures of that's a gardening Pro-D. This next picture is kids doing a waste audit at a high school. And then this is a picture from one of the sustainability conferences. So in my world, I'm not an educator, I'm a trained engineer, but my team is really always trying to support educators in the district. Under green spaces, we're trying to do more stuff, outdoor learning environments, there's gardening initiatives, food, education, healthy eating initiatives that happen all over the place. We obviously, the first part that people think about when you think of an environmental sustainability plan is this third leaf of resource conservation and climate change. And there we've got waste management, the standard waste management, water, and a very aggressive or very enthusiastic carbon reduction ambitions. And that's all captured there. Transportation, active transportation, it's a smaller leaf, as it were. It's a tougher one because it sits mostly outside the mandate of the school day, let's put it that way. But there are things we're doing, and that's another one where we're doing it well because we're partnering with the city who can bring resources, knowledge, and skill sets to the table that aren't necessarily ours in the K-12 sector. And in leadership, you know, we've got networks of like-minded people like myself at other school districts. We're developing a number of guidebooks there for people to work with. And we also trying to develop ourselves as a sustainability support. So we've got a sustainability at VSB email, and that is a reference point for reaching us. I want to highlight, this comes back to the key mandate, or how do we do our businesses. One of the key things that came out was not so much the specific actions we're doing, but where do we focus our efforts? And we came up through that consultation with sort of three, we call them implementation principles, for lack of a better word. Number one is education is our leverage. So how do we support teachers, other educators in the classroom in doing their work. The second principle is we follow and support our people. And, you know, if I'm a late middle-aged guy doing my job, I do not know what high school or school-age children are keenly concerned about. So that's why we let the educators and the students drive the agenda of what do we do. You know, I would have thought that some of the waste management issues were handled decades ago because we started a recycling program in the 80s. And what we've learned in the last 24 months is that all our ambitions over plastics recycling have been somewhat flawed, right? And it was students that started really bringing this up to the attention. And the third implementation principle is we try to make our efforts lasting. When people come to us with ideas or want to promote things, we try to look at how can we make this scalable? How can we do it as a pilot test at one school and expand it out and things like that? I personally don't have a lot of bandwidth in my job for one-off items. We have a joke in the department that one-off activities are by definition not sustainable. So what are we doing during COVID? Well, so many things have been constrained. You know, school access is limited. Clubs are on hiatus for the time being, anyways. So what we are trying to do is a lot of the things we're doing. A lot of things are going online with Pro-D, for instance. Some of our collaboration activities with people like UBC are on hiatus because they're not in classrooms either. But we are trying to do some things. We've launched outdoor learning guides. We had sustainability grants that we issued out to students and they were paused, but the funds are held. And once we get some restarting, we'll be able to push them out. Spontaneously, you know, one of the actions in our plan was find a way to connect educators because educators told us time and again that they feel isolated at their schools. They can't find like-minded teachers at other schools. And, you know, we debated email lists. No one wants more email. Facebook groups go stale. And then this COVID thing came along and suddenly everybody's working in a Teams environment. So there's a group of teachers who created an outdoor learning team. They're probably pushing several dozen, 70 or 80 members that they're organically growing and connecting to themselves. And, you know, if we tried to push a Teams environment on them 2 years ago, they wouldn't, but because we've just been forced there by the situation, they've embraced it. And then we did smaller things. We're trying to just help people. There's a lot of emphasis on education outdoors, you know, getting out of buildings. And there's a green teacher magazine, and my colleague discovered that we could get a district-wide subscription for not very much money. So we offered that out to all the teachers, and there's been some uptake on that. Since we are talking about climate change, I want to put in a plug for some of the work we do in the department, and this is pretty much what I spend the majority of my day. I should have introduced that we have a sustainability team that's 1.9 full-time equivalents spread across 3 different people. I'm the only full-timer in the department, and I probably spend 95% of my time on energy management, and my colleagues spend their time on some of the sustainability initiative. But we, like every other agency, entity, is trying to figure out how we're going to manage our carbon footprint. I'll just give a quick summary. It's no secret that the bulk of our emissions in the Vancouver School District are related to heating our buildings. Natural gas is whatever 90-something% that you see there. A little bit for fleet, almost nothing for fleet, small amount from electricity and paper. So burning a carbon fuel is really the source of our carbon footprint. So if you see, I'm going to show some charts that say natural gas consumption, and it's the same as carbon emissions. And what is the challenge? The City of Vancouver is mandating a 50% reduction by 2030, 80% by 2050. The provincial government has mandated every public sector agency cut its carbon footprint in half by 2030. And as we've heard already mentioned, the IPC report says if we don't get on track to get somewhere near 50% reductions by 2030, we're going to start crossing thresholds we can't pull back from. So the real challenge for the district is, can we find a pathway to achieve major carbon reductions? And the short answer is well, I won't, I'll show you some examples of the work we've been doing over the past 5-6 years. These are a bunch of charts for 6 different sites where we've done some retrofits, where we've done some seismic upgrades, and in some cases built completely new schools. And in all these examples, you're seeing that depending on the activity we do, we might be able to, if we don't do much, this one in the middle where we don't do much, we get a 25% reduction. But if you look at these new Kitsilano High School and New Gordon Elementary, these are heat pump schools, which make dramatic reductions in our carbon footprint. Those reductions have cost implications, and that's always the battle we're trying to do, is to try to find the funding for those kind of things. But if this is 6 sites, if we looked across our 109 sites, I did a very preliminary estimate that I presented to committee in September 2019, showing, okay, is there a pathway to get close to 50% by the year 2030? And we have a shot at it. It's a substantial sum of money, and I'm still trying to work out give the decision makers the number of what that is. But we've got a shot at it. And it's not just 2030 isn't just the end point. What we have to do is when we make these upgrades and partial improvements now, we have to be putting ourselves in a position to get to 0 by 2050. So, and all of our design standards put us on that path. It's just, you know, the urgent current mandate is that everybody's got to make some dramatic reductions pronto. So that's a bit more than I think more than my allotted time. If you want to reach us, you can just write to sustainability@vsb.ca. And I'm going to try to figure out how to, if someone wants to unshare me, if I'm not able to figure out how to unshare myself.
I'll, I think I can.
Did that help?
Few options. So I'm going to stop your sharing. That's all.
Perfect.
Okay. So thank you, Ron. And so lots of information. And so I don't want to, and it's great. And thank you for those slides. And I do want to get to listening to it, the City of Vancouver, and they're spending their time here. And so we can get to a panel discussion. But you can sort of see how this is all growing, all this information from, you know, the people who, you know, doing a lot of work on the ground, and to how this whole thing is evolving. So I just want to, again, just go through a couple of little slides here for the, so the Vancouver plan, and of course, there's the 6 big moves, and how we move, and how we build and renovate things, and how we capture carbon. So some of these are the big parts of the big moves that we have to, that they're trying to work out, and so we're going to hear a little bit about it. But again, you can see similarly to what Ron was talking about, you know, carbon emissions from buildings is huge, right? 54%. And of course, vehicles are also in there, but it's the buildings that are really large. So we have, thankfully, and really appreciate your time, both of you, because I know you have busy days too. So Matt Horn is the City of Vancouver's Climate Policy Manager. So he's responsible for implementing the city's climate emergency plan. And so in April, I think, of last year, there was the first writing of that plan, submission to City Council, and got through that stage. And just recently, in November, there was a lot of public interest and discussion about the new and improved, I don't know what we want to call it, but the action plan continues. And again, it's a plan that's getting further and further in terms of its detailing and the recommendations it's making. And really, it's great because he is obviously in touch with lots and lots of stuff that has to do with policy changes that aren't just happening locally, but other cities and into the countries and beyond. So we also have Laura Jane, who is also part of the sustainability. She's in transportation planning, and so she's a senior stakeholder for relations and promotion lead for sustainable transportation initiatives in transportation planning. So so anyhow, we're going to hear a little bit more from her, particularly about sustainable transportation. And so I'm, you know, it is a pretty bold move. It is a pretty big bite to chomp off, and lots of stuff that has to change. And you know, obviously, lots of businesses, lots of things, including our schools, are wrestling with how we're going to do this. But again, it's a very, very necessary step. So anyhow, welcome, Matt, and so we'll start with you, and then Laura can follow you after that. So thank you.
Great. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for giving us a chance to share some of the work we're doing up. And yeah, I really appreciate hearing the other presentations. So let me see if I can share this. Okay, can you see that slide there now? Great. So thanks for the introduction, Skye. And I think I'll try to sort of link this as much as possible to the previous presentation. So this is actually a slide deck we gave to Vancouver Council a few weeks ago. So, and we'll touch on the Climate Emergency Action Plan, which they just approved. So in terms of agenda, I will sort of walk through just a bit of context, sort of how the city looks at this, an overview of the actions in the Climate Emergency Action Plan, some of the work we're doing to try to account for equity, because council's been really clear they want that to be a high priority within the climate plan, and then give you a sense of next steps. If you're interested in looking at any of this in more detail, it's all up at vancouver.ca/climate emergency. So I think the full report and some summary materials are all up there. And if you're looking to sign up for more information, there's opportunities to do that as well. So in terms of context, and I think, so I'll give a little bit of the history here. So in January of 2019, Council declared a climate emergency, and they're one of the first councils around the world to do that. And I think it signaled both their concern about the issue and their desire for Vancouver to try to do more to do what we can to prevent climate breakdown. That was followed up by the report Skye mentioned. So in April 2019, we provided a report called the Climate Emergency Response that set 6 objectives that sort of framed the city's ambition and that sort of directed us as staff to work on implementation plans. So we went to the drawing board looking at ideas and actions that could meet those targets. We ran a public engagement process sort of from late last year through May or June of this year. We also, as all of us have been wrestling through, encountered a global pandemic, which was not part of the work plan when this started out. So as with so many people, we're trying to figure out how to sort of move ahead with priorities that are not shifting, and climate change is definitely one of those. It's still out there as sort of a sort of staring us in the face in the future, while also sort of recognizing the challenges that COVID is imposing in the near term in particular. And where we're at, sort of our most recent milestone was November of this month of this year. We brought back the Climate Emergency Action Plan report to Council. That's sort of the roadmap or the strategies to achieve those targets. That's what I'll walk through today. Council's approved those, so we'll sort of next year transition into a more of an implementation phase, which will include more analysis and engagement, but will be focused on implementing those individual actions and ideally putting us on track for the targets that Council set. This is just a little bit of how we're doing as a city. So you can see this is the gray bars there are citywide carbon pollution from buildings, transportation, and waste. And you see sort of over the last decade, sort of a modest decline. So we're starting to move in the right direction, which is a good thing, that 9% decline. You can also see compared to our 2030 target, which is a 50% cut, we're not moving fast enough. And the climate emergency declaration and the action plan, I think the essence of it are really trying to move from that white line to the yellow line. So we need to accelerate our efforts and to get on track for that target, which is, I think Ron explained well, is it lines up with where sort of the province is trying to move, what the IPCC is telling us. We do need to sort of accelerate our actions if we're going to sort of stem the worst impacts of climate change. And also, I think echoing what Ron said and sort of highlighting some of the VSB examples, it is not going to be easy to get there. I think we've tried to be clear with council on that. Like there's some challenging changes to work through that we've tried to sort of lay out what the city's role in helping those happen can be, but whether as individual residents, as businesses, as school boards, it's a challenging transition we, I think, need to undertake to achieve those sort of reductions and limit those impacts of climate change. This is the breakdown of carbon emissions in the city of Vancouver. And this will look a little bit different depending if you're looking for the province-wide or countrywide, but this is sort of what we deal with in the city of Vancouver. So the biggest chunk, 54% from natural gas use in buildings. Most of that comes from space and water heating. The next biggest chunk is transportation, so the cars and trucks on our road, just shy of 40%. And then we have small slices from electricity and a small bit from waste. But when you see when I go through the actions, they're very heavily focused on transitioning off of fossil fuels in our buildings and in our vehicles. And so that's, again, that's if we're going to be successful, we need to sort of make progress on those two main sectors here in the city. So this is just a quick bit on the scope of the plan. I mentioned April of last year, Council approved the Climate Emergency Response, which had 6 objectives. You can see those there on the screen. The Climate Emergency Action Plan focuses really heavily on 4 of those. So advancing active transportation and transit, accelerating zero emission vehicles, transitioning to zero emission space and water heating, and increasing the use of low carbon materials and construction practices. So I'll go into each of those in a bit more detail. That objective 1, the walkable complete neighborhoods, still really key to what we're trying to achieve as a city. Another plan or process the city is working through is called the Vancouver Plan process, because walkable complete neighborhoods are, like, it's so central to land use decisions. We're trying to advance that work through the Vancouver Plan. And then the 6th one there around restored coasts and forests is a recognition that if we're going to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, which is what we're trying to do, we also have to figure out negative emissions in the second half of the century. And the role we think that is sort of most appropriate in Vancouver is sort of helping to restore coasts and forests, that they can absorb more of the carbon emissions that are in the atmosphere and help, again, help bring down emissions and eventually transition to negative emissions. So I'll go through the overview of the actions here, and 2 sort of comments to up front. So on the way we've structured this is within each of those objective areas, there's what we call a game changer action, or one that the 4 game changer actions are, they just do more of the heavy lifting in terms of reducing carbon emissions. We did want to put extra highlight on those just so to build awareness with council and build awareness with public around those key pieces. They are designed as a package. So with each of those, there are supporting actions there to sort of work with residents and businesses and organizations to help reduce emissions and transition off of fossil fuels. So I'll go through each of those. The other thing to stress is this is really focused on the city's role in this transition and how can we change our policies and programs and regulations so that the systems change, and it helps that transition for residents and businesses. For this plan to work, there's a whole bunch of individual actions at a household level and a business level that have to stem from that plan, but we focus very much here on the role we can play in supporting that transition. So like thinking of Ron's Venn diagram, there's all sorts of dots and circles. This is very focused on the city of Vancouver circle and the actions we think we can take to move towards those targets. So the first is around that active transportation and transit. And again, the idea being we want to see more people walking, rolling, cycling, taking transit so that they're taking their cars for fewer trips. So the central game changer action here, and you may have heard about this one, this probably generated the most public discussion when this went to council, is the idea of planning for transport pricing in the metro core. And the basic idea being there'd be it's often referred to as congestion pricing or mobility pricing. The idea being that there'd be a trip applied a price applied per trip, per vehicle trip, to encourage people to choose walking, cycling, or transit instead of driving. The timing, I think, is important to stress here. It's sort of been mischaracterized a bit, but the recommendation is to give a fairly long ramp time for that. So 2025 was the timeline recommended in the report. That would give time to do the additional analysis engagement and I think figure out how to address some of the good concerns that have been raised around this recommendation. It also gives time to sort of build out the active transportation and transit networks so those become better and more viable options for more people and more of their trips. One of the things we know where cities around the world are using these types of transport pricing systems, they depend, or they're most successful where there are good options for people to choose instead of driving. So you see sort of a package of actions here really sort of focused on providing that support. So expanding and improving the walking and rolling networks in the city, working on more dedicated routes for transit so that sort of buses are traveling faster and more reliably. Also, some of the work we're doing just with schools, with businesses and employers to encourage more walking, cycling and transit use. And Laura Jane will speak to a bit more about that at the end of the presentation. There's also 2 parking related actions in here. So the first is to eliminate parking minimums and introduce parking maximums for new developments. The thinking here is that if we're not requiring as much parking in new buildings, developers can focus more on providing improved bike parking and other sustainable transportation options in those new developments. And then the related piece to that, again, another one that has, I think, generated some public conversation is the idea of implementing residential parking permits on a citywide basis. And right now, only about 10% of residential streets in the city have parking permits, and we're proposing to move that across the city. The rationale for that, one, it does sort of help us better manage the curb space and allows us to remove the parking minimums, as I mentioned, in the new developments. It also starts to reflect some of the value of that public space, and over time dedicate or reallocate some of that to higher value uses such as patios and bike lanes and parklets. It also links very closely to the electric vehicle work I'll mention here in a minute. So the next action area is around electric vehicles, and we know there's going to continue to be lots of trips and by vehicle on our roads, and I think to make sure we're still aligning with our climate targets, we need to transition those vehicles to electric vehicles as rapidly as possible. So the central action here is the idea of implementing a carbon pollution surcharge on residential parking permits. And so that for those residential parking permits, where we're proposing sort of the base permit be a very low cost permit, what we want to do is if someone's buying a new, more expensive vehicle, a new, more expensive gas or diesel vehicle, there would be a surcharge on that to encourage the person purchasing that vehicle to choose an electric vehicle. If someone is driving an older vehicle or purchasing a lower cost vehicle, that surcharge would not apply. And our thinking is that it's a reasonable starting point to set a higher expectation that someone with the means of purchasing a new, more expensive vehicle, there can be a higher expectation that that be an electric vehicle. The supporting actions in this case, and we know from our experience in cities around the world that transition to electric vehicles, for it to be successful, really does require a robust charging network. So 3 actions to highlight there. We would be expanding the public charging network, particularly in sort of neighborhoods that don't have good access to home charging, so that those options are there. And there's some interesting possibilities here, so partnering with the Vancouver School Board around underutilized overnight parking and possibly providing charging there is something we've talked about a little bit. Increasing EV charging on private property. We want to be increasing the EV charging that goes into new non-residential buildings in particular is an area we think we sort of have a gap in our current policies. Want to be working with our business licenses to encourage more EV charging in gas stations and parking lots around the city. And finally, also want to be providing support for EV charging in rental buildings, which has been a gap in provincial programs to date. And then the final one there in the bottom right is around supporting EV charging for passenger fleets. So taxis, ride hailing, car share vehicles. Most of those are driving more kilometers per year than your average private vehicle. So if we can provide some additional support to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles there, we get more emissions reductions per vehicle because of those higher kilometers per year. Transition to buildings here. Talk a little bit, and so I mentioned sort of the focus here on zero emission space and water heating. Again, this is sort of our biggest slice of emissions, and we really do need to see reductions here if we're going to be successful. The types of solutions we're looking for would be transitions to heat pumps and electric heating systems. So some of the things Ron was mentioning, more energy efficient buildings, and also sort of increasing the amount of renewable gas in the gas grid. So the central action here is the idea of setting carbon pollution limits on existing buildings and streamlining regulations to support those transitions. And we already have carbon requirements on new buildings in the city, and we've had those since 2016. What we're recommending is we expand that approach to apply to existing buildings, and particularly with a focus on large commercial buildings and detached homes. We aren't proposing those carbon limits on rental buildings or non-market housing. The design of these would be, they would like to bring them back to council next year with the sort of the details of that change. They wouldn't come into force until 2025, first relatively modestly, and then declining over time. And the thinking there is, if we can set that signal as far in advance in the future as possible, it gives building owners time to plan for those changes and make them, like, so when a furnace needs to be replaced, we would ideally, like, that's the key time to make that transition to a renewable energy system. We don't want these set up in a way that's sort of forcing an early change if at all possible. The streamlined regulations part is important to mention, and I know certainly looking at the way permitting happens in the city of Vancouver, we know there's lots of places where it does represent a barrier to change, and heat pumps are a good example there. It is more complicated than it needs to be to get a heat pump permit currently in the city, and we want to simplify that. Again, if we are pushing people and businesses to make these changes, we shouldn't at the same time be in their way to make those changes on the permitting side of things. In terms of the supporting actions, I think really in many ways sort of mirroring this off what we think has been a successful approach on new construction in the city. So a piece there around building industry capacity to make sure we've got sort of the trades and designers and supply chains to supply these renewable energy options when building owners are ready to make those switches. Supporting early owner action is really around incentives. So we've been working with the province and their Clean BC plan for the last several years and topping up some of those provincial incentives. So for people that are interested in making those changes, there definitely are cost premiums associated with that at the moment, and trying to sort of make that as easy and affordable as possible. And ideally getting sort of as many of those changes happening early so that they happen well in advance of those carbon limits coming into place. And the final one there is facilitating access to renewable energy. And this is really around working with utilities, so BC Hydro, with Fortis, with the private district energy utilities in the city, so that when customers are looking to make that switch to renewable energy, there's cost-effective and timely access to that. The last action area is around low carbon materials and construction practices. This is sort of it's a new one to a lot of people. So when we most of what we talked about so far is when we burn fossil fuels, it reduces carbon emissions. There are also carbon emissions in the building materials that we use in the city and around the world. So concrete and cement being a really good example of a very carbon intensive material. So this is focused on sort of shifting to lower carbon construction materials and practices. So examples would be, you can get lower carbon blends of concrete using more natural materials such as wood or mass timber in construction, or just building a building with less parking would be another good example of a building with less carbon emissions associated with it at the construction phase. So the central action here would be using our regulatory tools to require new buildings to use low carbon materials. So in the same way we're requiring new buildings to minimize their use of fossil fuels, this would be requiring them to use lower carbon construction materials. The plan is to set that in a performance-based way, so we're not picking the exact outcome, and allowing developers to pick the approaches that make sense for them in a given project. But through the Vancouver building bylaw and our rezoning policies, we'd be setting those limits. And again, the proposal is they would decline over time to line up with our targets. Similar to the work on existing buildings, wanting to have sort of a number of supportive actions there. So the support people building with low carbon materials, again, is that idea of capacity building. We've got some really good expertise here in the city already, but we know we need to grow that if it's going to become standard practice for all new developments. Making it easier and less expensive to build with low carbon materials, again, gets to the idea of incentives and removing barriers. So a good example, we've been doing work on mass timber construction and wood construction, and making it allowing within our building code for those types of buildings, taller wood and mass timber buildings, to be built as the engineering evolves to do that safely. And then the final piece there is aligning with complementary strategies and actions. And there's just a lot of touch points with this work, with the city's zero waste strategy, with our parking policies, and just wanting to make sure those signals are as aligned as possible. So we're not sending conflicting signals from the city in terms of where we would like new developments to be moving. Just really quickly, I focused very much on sort of Vancouver's role, but again, if we're going to be successful, we need a whole bunch of entities moving in a similar direction. So we've highlighted in this plan a lot of the work that we're trying to do with other government agencies and our utilities, but it certainly extends beyond that to businesses and organizations, individuals, households, etc. that we need to be moving in a similar direction if we're going to be successful. I'll skim over this pretty quickly. This is modeling we've done to inform the plan. So just really quickly, the top black line is how we've been doing, and the dotted black line is where we would be headed if we didn't have any new policies. So a pretty wide gap relative to our target, even if we continue that modest decline. I'll just jump to the dotted white line surrounded by the red band. That's if we implement the Climate Emergency Action Plan, and also work very closely with the province to sort of move forward on full implementation of their climate plan. So that it does give us a pathway to our targets. I think that's encouraging from our perspective. The challenging part is it's a pretty narrow pathway. We have very little luxury to sort of pick and choose amongst the actions and still get to that target. And the takeaway that I think we've taken from that and communicated to council is that I think, yeah, the target's within reach, but we need to work ambitiously on our own actions and also really work to encourage the province and the federal government and other organizations to be ambitious in their actions if we're going to have a chance of meeting those targets. And then this stops in 2030. We need to continue going down post 2030 towards our 2040 and 2050 targets. This is, I think, most of this, I think, has ended up sort of focusing on some of the challenges of this transition. We do think there's some really good benefits as well that are worth highlighting. So whether it's electric vehicles or heat pumps, there are costs and a premium associated with those, absolutely. There's also pretty significant savings if we can find a way of making those investments upfront. So walking, cycling, transit definitely has sort of lower costs associated with it than driving. Electric vehicles are less expensive to operate than gasoline vehicles. A more efficient building is going to have less energy use and less energy cost than a more energy consuming building. So all those savings do add up, and we're sort of looking at it if that 1.3 billion investment across sort of residents and businesses would lead to 2.2 billion in savings. So about a $1 billion saving for residents and businesses if we can successfully implement this plan. I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about equity, because I said council's been really clear throughout this process. They want us to place a stronger equity lens on the climate planning work than the city has done in the past. So a bit on process, we established a climate and equity working group. This established in January of this year, met 6 times sort of through the first half of the year. You can see the list of organizations and individuals involved. Yeah, it was a really good experience. So even as COVID hit, they were keen to continue meeting and providing their thoughts and advice on the ideas we were coming up with. And I think I would characterize where we're at as sort of, I think, a good first step on incorporating equity into a climate plan. A lot of the elements of that first step came from ideas from this group, and also I think really sort of pointed to us the many other additional steps we're going to need to take if we really to fulsomely integrate equity into the implementation of this plan. We also had 3 reviews done of different stages of the plan. So the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives reviewed our engagement materials from an equity perspective, and then the Law Foundation and Toronto Environmental Alliance reviewed a draft of the plan, again trying to give us ideas of how we could strengthen it from an equity perspective, and really appreciative of those thoughtful reviews, and have done our best to incorporate the ideas into the plan. This is just sort of a snapshot of how we're trying to sort of incorporate equity. So the first piece is minimizing burdens for those already struggling, and the second is setting higher expectations that can afford to make those changes a little bit earlier. And the piece I mentioned on the carbon pollution surcharges for parking permits is a good example there. And if you are either you don't have a vehicle, or you're driving an older vehicle or a lower cost vehicle, those surcharges would not apply. But if you're buying a new, more expensive gas or diesel vehicle, we are proposing a higher expectation that the transition to zero emission vehicles happens there. The plan does, I think, lay out in a good amount of detail both some of the additional work we need to do and making sure the resources are there to follow up on it. And we've built in a number of equity milestones, I think, that do a good job of holding ourselves to a good amount of accountability and giving council good mechanisms to hold us accountable on the delivery of this plan. Last piece for me is the financial approach, and this so the approach we've taken here, all the actions I walk through, we have done costing to give a sense as to how much it's going to cost the city to implement those actions over the next 5 years. And then so you can see that $500 million over the next 5 years is what we think in total that would cost. The good thing is the city's not starting from scratch here. So if we look at just what we've been investing from a baseline perspective in things such as improvements to transit, improvements to active transportation, incentives for green buildings, it's about $270 million over that 5 years. So it leaves a gap of about 230. We've proposed sort of 4 ways to close that gap. One is in the active transportation space. We think we can do make some of those improvements in the active transportation network with more cost-effective approaches where we come back over time and sort of upgrade some of the public realm improvements that we wouldn't do on the first pass through. The second would be accessing funds from provincial, federal governments and other partners. The 25 million is indicative of roughly what we've been able to sort of secure from those partners over the last several years. There's a number of pieces of sort of new revenue identified in the plan. So the parking permits would be one good example. The direction in the plan is that any of those revenue sources be directed back into climate emergency investments. And then that still leaves a gap. That's sort of the big remaining piece for us where we can close that is the next capital plan, which council will start to wrestle with next year, and increasing investment towards climate solutions in that plan. And then what's next? Excuse me. So council's approved the plan that I just walked through. So they've asked us to move forward with implementing it. What that'll look like next year in 2022 through 2024 would be additional engagement and analysis around those individual actions. And then we'd be coming back to council with the specific changes for their consideration. And if they're supportive of them, they would then become implemented. So, and also next year we would see the first annual progress report and then subsequent annual progress reports from there. As we move towards the end of that period, sort of 2023, 2024, we'll start to turn our eye to what happens in the second half of the decade, and hopefully in a situation of keeping ourselves on track for that 2030 target. I think that was it for me. I'll stop sharing. Laura was going to get a couple remarks. One thing I'll just mention, I can't remember if I mentioned at the beginning, but if you are interested in any of this information, vancouver.ca/climate emergency, it's all there, and you can, the connections to follow up with us at a staff level are there as well. So happy to talk about any of this stuff in more detail if there isn't time tonight. So, and then I think I'm just going to turn it straight over to Laura. Is that okay, Sky?
Great. Thanks, Matt, for the great overview, and thanks, Sky, for inviting us here today. And thanks also to all the previous presenters. It's really inspiring to hear about your work, and also inspiring that so many of you are still here late on a Thursday evening to discuss sustainability. So yeah, thanks for being here and letting us present. So my name's Laura. I work in transportation planning at the City of Vancouver. My pronouns are she, her. I oversee promotions and encouragement initiatives to promote active travel and transit. And I also oversee the schools component of that. So I've been at the city for the past year. Obviously, COVID, it's been a different year so far, but we're really excited about some of the future plans we have on the school side of things. I don't have any slides. I just wanted to speak for really a few quick minutes to let you know that as part of the Climate Emergency Action Plan, we're also drafting what we're calling a Transportation Demand Management Action Plan. So this, or TDM is another word that we use. So this TDM plan really focuses on the promotions and encouragement side of things, recognizing that infrastructure is key, policies are key, but with promotions and encouragement, we can, increase the use of the infrastructure that we build. So we want to help increase the walking, cycling, transit mode share as part of the Big Move 2 target that Matt mentioned, which is that 2/3 of trips would be by active transportation and transit by 2030. So the TDM plan that we're drafting currently has 10 draft strategies and over 60 draft actions, and it's still a work in progress. And I wanted to just mention, so one of the draft strategies that we have in there is to expand our school active travel program in collaboration with the VSB, and we've already had some conversations with the VSB about this. In order to really build and sustain an active travel culture in schools. And I know a lot of you are also key to this, being as you are involved in the PACs. So some of these things, are really expanding some of the things we already offer, like our Walk, Bike, Roll mini grant programs for schools. We want to update our website and make it a lot easier for teachers and parents and students to navigate all the different resources that are available across the region and supports. We want to scale our cycling education programs to reach more grade 6, 7 students, hopefully all at some point. We want to create more resources as well for high school students. I think there's a big gap there. We currently have programs for elementary school students, but don't have a lot for high school students, and many more things that we want to do. And so I just want to let you know that that's happening. Discussions are happening. In terms of next steps, I just say that we'll definitely keep you and the VSB posted as programs develop. And also, if you have ideas for promotions and encouragement initiatives to encourage active travel and transit, feel free to put them in the chat. And yeah, thanks very much for having us here. That's all from me. Thanks, Guy.
Thank you so much. So yeah, so in terms of moving forward, we went through those different things in the big steps. And of course, Laura Jane's talking about how we move. And so we are going to move to the panel discussion. So, if you have some questions, and I can see that the chat's got lots of questions. So just give us a couple of moments. Well, if you're not a presenter, just turn your video off. And I think then if you go up to your view and you select the view, that would be the gallery view, then the people who aren't, I think that's how you would do it. Let me just see in terms of view options. So I'm just gonna stop sharing this, and I think then you'll be able to see the presenters here. So there's Matt, there's Laura, Ron, and I think some of our, so I'm not sure whether, Annabella, you wanna put your screen, yours on? Perfect. And so anybody, let's see who else. Oh, great. You guys stuck around, Mara. Thank you. Excellent. Great stuff, guys. Okay, so how do we want to do this? Does anyone, Alan, did you pick out some questions that might be good ones to start off with for our panel?
Well, there's a number that have come through. I'll see if I can do them justice here. The first few were directed more to the students, so maybe it makes sense to start with those. And the first was a question about how to keep or regain the momentum that was happening on Fridays over the last year for sort of further action, given that COVID has made it very difficult to get people together in person in any kind of large groups. I know people alluded to some of what's going on now as part of that, but if there's any sort of encapsulating comments people have on that, that would be great.
Anyone want to dive into that one?
I can start. Well, this made me think of what the 3 students from the VSB SC were talking about, how they're doing all these, the restart program, and all these things. I think that's a really good way what they're doing just to kind of keep the momentum and keep the conversation going, which sounds great. And also just made me think of just what Laura talked about of including high school students and getting more programs for them. That sounds like an awesome idea to continue and really, you know, to continue to collaborate and really opening this space for solutions for everyone, especially students in our generation who are going to be the main, you know, future leaders in this crisis. Yeah. But I mean, it's that's a question with so many answers. So there's really, yeah, endless answers.
Sorry, I'll add quickly too. I think that things like this, bringing people from, you know, different ages or different backgrounds together in a space like this to have dialogues and to continue engaging the public and keep bringing that message forward that we are in a climate crisis. This is something that is very urgent. This is something that requires emergency action, that requires all of us on board. And I think even beyond this, we can look around us to see what's happening right now. For example, the Indigenous solidarity actions that are happening this week and have been happening throughout the year. Those are extremely important when it comes to land defense actions and really standing up for, you know, protecting our natural spaces and making sure that Indigenous rights are respected. But it even goes beyond that, looking at the groups who are most marginalized and looking at what role they play and what role everyone plays to make sure that in the future we're building something that works better for everybody. So really just, you know, using this as a starting place, but recognizing that it just keeps going from here, and there are so many more directions to keep going and more people that we need to hear from and bring into the conversation.
I see Linda has her hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question, just kind of pivoting off of what you and Annabella were talking about. I'm just curious, if you don't mind, if you can let me know what the sustainability team's official stand is on the school liaison officers in the schools. If you have an opinion, I'd really love to hear it.
Sorry, your question was about our opinions on school liaison officers?
Yeah, you know, just because you're mentioning the Indigenous aspects and all that. So I'm just, you know, curious about your response to that, the two of you. Or, you know, on behalf of your sustainability teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can definitely say that sustainability teams really advocates for investing in communities and investing in community care and using that as a mechanism to avert harm and to reduce harm rather than, you know, investing. Like, so in short, what I'm trying to say is we really believe in making investments in clean energy and in building communities and in caring for people and in making sure that those who have been marginalized in the past have the supports that they need to thrive. And that's really what we're advocating for, a world where everyone can have those opportunities to thrive and really are feeling supported by their communities.
Thank you.
So there were a couple of other questions directed specifically towards the VSB SC folks. One was, do you folks do presentations in elementary schools? And the second, I'll toss it in there because it maybe some other comments. It's just a question about the sort of participation in the VSC, wondering about the kind of outreach you guys have to schools on the east side, because there was a perception of the questioner that people perhaps didn't know quite that much about it in some of the east side schools.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So we currently do not do anything for elementary school students. A lot of the content that we try to bring forward is more suitable for secondary school students. However, that I feel like is something that we could be interested in doing. It's just obviously education is something that we're all very passionate about and would certainly be interested in trying to somehow incorporate maybe like an online workshop that we could give to elementary school kids, something like that. Yeah, I think it's a really great idea. And then to speak to the second question, which was, do we connect with the schools in East Van? And so we have youth head delegates, which are students from every secondary school in Vancouver, or at least we try to get at least one. This year we have 27, so we have representatives from multiple schools, or multiple representatives from the same school. And their responsibility is to spread word of our events and promote the conference at their schools. So that's how we try to reach out. But I do agree that, as with like our team, a lot of the kids that do get involved are kind of from the same area. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So thank you for that. The questions from here on in kind of came up more when Ron McDonald was speaking, and one I may not get this right. Vicky, maybe feel free to jump in and elaborate. It was quite a sort of a large chunk of ideas around how the VSB can use its assets in terms of repurposing buildings and lands to impact sort of the green targets of the city overall.
Well, what I'll say is, again, our prime focus is using our assets for educational purposes, and we don't have substantial lands that we've declared surplus to educational needs. There's lots of talk about using the outdoor spaces as better learning environments. And the classic example would be, can we transition from more sports field-based outdoor environments to more natural-based outdoor spaces? And in the elementary, there's a lot of really good work developing what we call outdoor learning areas, which are spaces that are being developed so that curriculum can be delivered outside. It's a structured space and such like that. And several schools have developed that.
Thank you. One of the specifics in the comment too was wondering about old buildings being possibly repurposed for housing, and the leases developed with BC Housing. So again, if that's kind of within the mandate of what you folks are.
Well, what I'll highlight is we've not declared. We don't have. Well, I'm not going to speak for the facility planners and the people who do all the catchment numbering, but again, we have the few buildings we have that are surplus are at seismic risk. So for instance, there's some places where we've seismically upgraded 3 buildings, and there's a 4th building there that was not part of the K-12 program and such like that. So we don't have a lot of spare building space around, would be the global question. But definitely people are asking about, the schools are an integral part of the community. Let's just start with that point, and how do they interact with the community better? We have sites that have shared commercial facility, health facilities with the city. Community centers is the word I was looking for. And there's a number of other ideas floating around about there, but at present, I don't think there's any initiative to repurpose a school building as a residential building.
Is it okay if I jump in there just for a moment there, Alan? And I know that Matt has to go a little bit, and I know that and I want to make sure that we have some discussion. But I was just wondering if we could maybe just go through everybody in terms of a perspective on, we're certainly talking about the city of Vancouver or our schools or our homes. But can anyone maybe talk about how they sort of see this on we're talking about ecosystems, but about sort of the ecosphere, which is our planet, and how all of these things are tied in terms to social justice and all the other types of things, and climate justice, and how those things kind of intersect somehow. Does anyone want to go first on that one?
I can speak to that in terms of how everything is very interconnected. I think you bring up a lot of good points there, and I think that's a main aspect of the climate crisis that people don't often think about, because it's much easier. It's just a common narrative to think of it as a very single-minded issue, but the reality is that the climate crisis is extremely intersectional. It exacerbates all of the other crises that we face, whether that's migrant rights, or whether that's racial justice, or whether that has to do with Indigenous sovereignty, like I've been talking about. And the reality is that the climate crisis is something that affects people differently, which is a narrative that's not often communicated. Like, for example, even within our own country here, like Sky mentioned a bit, but there are Indigenous people who are on boil water advisories and have been for many, many years. But in Vancouver, for the most part, for many of us, we won't feel impacts like that. We won't feel it the same way. We will not have to deal with our homes being flooded or our livelihoods being destroyed because of natural disasters. That's just not the place that we're in right now. Whereas in other parts of our country, even in other countries in the world, they are facing impacts like this at this moment. And I think that's a really important narrative to keep in mind. Just, yes, things are really, they have the potential to get very bad at home here, but these impacts are already happening all over the world. And this is crucial as we try to take action on the climate crisis. We know that our solutions can't just serve the privileged and the wealthy and the people who are already benefiting more so than others in society. And that's really the crux of what climate justice needs to incorporate, and just how we need to frame our solutions and how we think about these problems.
That's great. And maybe Matt, because I know I know that's part of the thing that he's dealing with too, in terms of looking about equity and how to build that in, and maybe help. I know that there was a question in the chat earlier a little bit about how do you see equity, and how do you frame it so that people understand the benefits, because people think about their car and they're very attached to their cars. But what happens when you go down and you're trying to drive through a city that's so condensed now with densification, now that you basically can't move? So maybe you can just illuminate a little bit more about that before you have to go, because I know you have to take your child to bed.
Yeah, I can try to add to that. That was a very eloquent response from Sam. I think like one of the real challenges around climate change is like there's both like the interconnectivity of it, which is hard to wrap your head around. It's not the way we're sort of naturally wired to think, but also just the breadth in terms of geography and time that also covers. We're not just talking about sort of a relatively constrained issue within city of Vancouver. We're talking like a city of Vancouver covering varying impacts across all income levels, all races. It's definitely not equitably distributed. And that's just in Vancouver. You sort of look in other parts around the world, those impacts could be much larger. And then projecting 10, 20, 30, 40 years into the future, that's just, it's hard to get your head wrapped around all those. And I think we're trying to sort of come up with responses to those to alleviate the worst of those impacts. But then, it does sort of come right back down to sort of like, what does this mean to me in my daily life today and tomorrow? And how do I travel through the city? And what does this mean for my home? And it's hard to keep that all together. It's sort of a coherent piece as a narrative for people. I think in terms of those, the challenges at sort of within a Vancouver level and the changes, I think we're hopefully going to find a way to make over the next decade and beyond. I think that's part of the balancing act, is sort of keeping the urgency of climate change and those range of impacts front of mind as motivation, while also being, I think, as empathetic as possible to the anxiety people are feeling about those changes. And again, they're not easy changes to make, whether you're someone who's managing a facility or someone who's figuring out how to get to soccer practice. And it's like there's just fundamentally a bunch of challenges we're going to have to work through together.
I'd be willing to throw in a comment. I'll make this comment as an individual and not representing the district, because I don't know actually what our policy is on some of these things. But let's talk about the city in the ecosphere. that was your starting point, Sky. It's really easy to look around Vancouver and say we live in nature and all this kind of stuff, but the densification that's going to happen, that is going to create walkability and a vibrant city, is also is going to transform us more and more in the direction of a concrete jungle. And I know the city is desperately working on that with things like the loss of tree canopy and things like that. But the reason I say that is because I grew up decades ago in a suburban environment, and there was a creek somewhere on my walk home from school, and I had parks and stuff like that. And from being a person inside an educational institution, it's not hard to find people who have, in Vancouver, who are part of our school system, who have limited connection to the natural world. And that's why some of our outdoor spaces is providing that connection. Maybe it's easy in Maple Ridge to go find a big cedar tree, but it's not so hard to find one near a school these days in the Vancouver district. So this aligns with lots of things the city is doing with their park strategies, with what we're doing trying to preserve and enhance our outdoor spaces, is that this connection to even the simple things of the gardening initiatives, which have, opened eyeballs about where our food system is centered, have been very powerful. And for an older person like me, it's easy to forget that some people have never grown up with a backyard garden, because I always had one, things like that. And it sounds simple and it sounds trivial, but that we have to be consciously aware of that as we move forward and make sure we understand how the city fits in the bigger ecosystem. Personal comment, not representing any district policy. Does that help?
Yeah, it's always good to get people's perspectives. So Annabella, do you have anything you want to sort of chip in and sort of comment about some of the things that may have sort of stood out to you? And we can maybe just go through everybody and just sort of have comments about how you feel.
Yeah, I can't really remember the initial question now. I've lost with Matt's and Ron's words. That was really, really wise and really struck me there. Really interesting statements. And I totally agree. I'm really happy to be living here. It's like a blessing to be living in Vancouver, and I'm able to, go on hikes with my family. I grew up in a really outdoorsy family, and, from a young age exploring Canada and Vancouver, and it's so beautiful to see our forest. But again, kind of what Sam was saying, how it's just interesting to see the levels of impact of climate change and how that's gonna go on in the future. And even I've already seen it, like I'm going back to places today and seeing the trails are changing, the people are changing, the policies are changing. So it's really scary, but interesting to see, changes are happening right in front of our eyes, and right now. So yeah.
Thanks, Annabella. So Rachel, do you want to pipe in and say maybe something about what you say? Because I know you've got some lots of ideas around social things too. I can't hear you. Unmute.
Oh, what was the question again?
Oh, well, I mean, just to sort of add your comments about, maybe in terms of thinking of the bio that you talked about and the types of things that you're passionate about in terms of, connections and, community and all the rest of the things that are important. So how do you see these things, and how do we keep this momentum, but the conversations and all those things going about how these things are all connected?
Okay, honestly, I think that it all starts with like this connection. So building hope and being informed of what's going on around in the world. And starting small basically just means that like our everyday actions will basically like will be, I don't know how to word it, will eventually like benefit us in the longer run. Sorry, I was like in another call right now, and I didn't get to hear the question.
No, it's okay. I mean, so maybe, Leona, do you want to say maybe a little something about the stuff that you're doing? So I know that you're in grade 10, and you have a lot of interests from what I remember. and social justice and all those types of things are high on your priority. So do you want to take a little bit of a conversation about that?
Yeah, definitely. I'm on the younger side, but I learned so much from this call already. It was really insightful listening to all of you speak. I'm very inspired, actually. I care a lot about social justice. I care a lot about a lot of things. And yeah, being a Chinese Canadian girl, things have happened, and things that have happened have made me feel really strongly and passionate about treating everyone equally and the same. And I also love how, I should have added it, but some of us have our pronouns in our name. I think that's really important. And I think we've come a really, really long way. Like, I'm really proud of the progress we've made and everything, and the progress that was led by students and just youth. And I'm very proud. I think we've done a really good job. I'm really passionate about climate action and climate justice, and that's obviously why I took on a VSBSC role. And yeah, agreeing with Rachel, I think that communicating with others and engaging in the conversation and just educating people around us is the most important thing. When I go to my exec calls with the other VSBSC exec members, and like them sharing things about their week and just having that connection and that sort of fellowship with people who are passionate about things that I'm passionate about, I feel so good and I feel so empowered, because I know that, you know, there's still hope and that we are all working towards making sustainable and meaningful change. And even listening to Annabella and Sam, like, y'all, so proud of y'all. I feel really hopeful that things are going to get a lot better. And yeah, the best thing is knowing that adults are supporting you. Honestly, that's the best thing that a kid can hear. And having you guys, all the adults on the call, like, thank you. This means a lot to me because it's our future. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate it so much. So Myra, if you would like to just sort of cap off your group, and then we'll go to Laura for a last word, and then we'll top it off with Sam, and then just a couple more slides. And again, thank you guys all. So Myra, to you, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really agree with what everyone else has been putting out onto the table. I think it's so powerful just to have the connection, especially, and to really have the space to talk and share about these issues. I guess one thought that I would like to put out is sort of highlighting that we have a privilege to be able to do something about the climate crisis, for us to be able to take care of our environment and to be able to have the time and the, I guess, like, support to take action is something that we should take advantage of. And it's something that we should definitely be working towards. Going back to the intersectionality of climate change and how it affects different people in different ways, it really is something that we all have to keep in mind, and just recognizing your privilege and understanding that if you can do something, you absolutely should, because there are people who are struggling, say, to put food on their tables. There's people who are struggling to just get access to their to meeting their basic needs. So that is a conversation that I'm always willing to have, very passionate about it, and it's something that I reflect on all the time.
Thank you so much. Laura, I could see you shaking your head there in agreement.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, obviously the world we're in right now with COVID too, I think more than ever, it's kind of brought to light so many inequities in our society and in our city. And I think it's really important, again, I guess what I think about a lot is, how do we really make sure that we embed equity in the work that we're doing? And it's actually been really, I mean, I think inspiring, since I've only been at the city for the past year, to actually see that, you know, the amount of learning that's going on, and people who are we're generally trying to incorporate an equity lens into the work we're doing. And so I'm thinking just on the school side, one of the things that we're thinking about as well is like thinking about disproportionately impacted communities, and how do we ensure as well that the work we're doing, that we're reaching all the schools that need the support, and not just the schools that have the time and have the privilege to reach out to us with ideas. And so how do we make sure as well that we're kind of equitably distributing our time to support schools across the city. And so, yeah, I'm really inspired to hear all of the young people on the call, and really makes me also like, oh, I feel like I need these, like, need to start some high school committees and walk bike roll groups, and like, you know, I have all these ideas just from hearing you speak. So yeah, just really appreciate it. And yeah, it's great to be here.
And that's the idea, is to keep that energy growing, right? So over to you, Sam, if you can just kind of put the icing on the cake for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate what everyone said, because I think it's a narrative that really lacks from traditional climate narratives when we're talking about climate change and melting icebergs and plastic pollution. Like, these are all things that are happening, but when we think about it, it's really not the root of the issue. It's not, like, talking about these things is not going to solve any problems, and we need to be thinking about what's actually causing these. What's causing emissions to rise? What is causing our inequities to continue to grow? And it really comes down to, well, very simply put, it comes down to like fossil fuel companies, and it comes down to corporations who have continually prioritized wealth and profit and economics over the well-being of people and communities, and those on the margins, and those who don't have a head start in life. And our systems were not designed to uplift these people. Our systems were designed to exacerbate inequalities and make sure that people stayed in their social class, and that they stayed separate from each other. And I think that climate solutions are really about acknowledging these things, acknowledging that we're all part of these systems that are very broken and very flawed, and acknowledging our place within them, whether we have more privilege or we don't, and knowing our positionality when it comes to other people and where you are and where you land, and from there doing something about it, and really doing something in a way that makes, you know, it doesn't make it about you. It's not about your resume, or it's not about what you want to gain from it. It's really about doing something for the sake of the greater good, and because it's the right thing to do, and because it's the necessary thing to do. Yeah.
So thank you all for being here. I'm just going to cap it off with a couple more slides, just to sort of, and I'll put myself back on again, just to sort of talk a little bit about you know, kind of where, you know, the policy and the things need to go in terms of accountability. So I just wanted to, you know, point out in terms of this idea, you know, definitely we're thinking globally, we are acting locally. So what we can do here in our neighborhoods with the people in our families, how we can have those discussions, how we can bring this to our own tables. And it's not going to be easy for every single family to have these discussions either, but it's an important discussion to have. So I encourage everybody to keep that energy up. And also really, I think, important news in terms of the Parliament C12 first reading. I mean, it's only in the first reading. It's going to go through 3 readings and then get voted on. But basically an act respecting transparency and accountability in Canada's efforts to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the year 2050. And what that is really saying is it's put some teeth into these targets so that we actually, you know, sort of force that we have to get there, and that, you know, we need to have those things, and that accountability needs to be at a high level to drive the things. And I think that's what we've also been talking about today. So eco-justice is one of those places. So these are some of the things that are in Bill C12. So you can definitely find out about it. And it wasn't today, it was a while back, but not that long ago. And so all of these things are, you know, legally bind the government to a process to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And so of course, you know, lots of things that go into that. And so one of the things even if you're not going to go out and you're not going to be, you know, active in terms of an action, or, you know, you're kind of staying at home and we can't go out right now so much, write or call your MP. And definitely call them. Calling them is even stronger than writing oftentimes, and tell them what you think, and support that. And, you know, even just a few calls really make an impact, because not that many people go that extra step. So doing those types of things. And then Eco-Justice is doing some great stuff. So if you want to find out about all the different types of cases that they are doing, some incredible work there on Eco-Justice. So check them out. And this hashtag Gen Climate Action, really big action with these 7 Ontario youth, that's quite a successful, it's going to go forward in the court. So that's kind of a nice piece to be looking at. So again, just keep yourself involved, keep moving forward. And here's a few other links, and I can put some of those in chat, in the chat. But we heard, I think, when we were at Maya's thing with Reset, Climate Cool.org. So just what are something you can do every day? Little things, and it doesn't mean that we have, you know, you're going to change your whole life overnight. But what are some of the things that you can do to change actions, and slowly change behaviors, and slowly get ourselves, and maybe not so slowly, right? Anyhow, again, thank you everybody for participating, and I'm going to now just pass it back to Gord for any last words in closing our meeting. And thank you all. Really appreciate you guys so much.
I don't really have anything additional to add. Thank you again to all the speakers, and thank you, Sky, for bringing us all together again. It's, you know, we're here because we're passionate about the topic on a Thursday night. So thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you to everybody for attending.
So everyone, yay, and holding you guys all up.